So what was it, about 2 years ago, Alex, we got in touch and we talked about trying to do something together on the channel. So I've got a YouTube channel, obviously you do, and you saw that I was getting stuck into this bike when it was all, I think, in bits and pieces still. And we talked about eventually, when I finally get around to putting it together, we'd do something. So here we are, all these years later, she's done. And yeah, we thought we'd do a kind of quick walk around the bike, tell you what it's all about. A lot of people watching this channel will know what this is, but there might be some people that don't. And in case you don't, this is a 1981 BMW R100 Classic Sport. And I think in some regards, this might be one of the first examples of a modern classic motorbike, because there was really nothing particularly new about this bike when it came out. It was actually a bit of a throwback to the legendary R90S. You know, BMW's, I suppose, kind of flagship sports tourer at the time. And in some regards, the bike that, you know, looking back, a lot of people say kind of saved BMW and set their kind of course for where BMW motorbikes are today. But this bike, when it came out, you know, they'd moved on from the R90S, but they kind of made the Classic Sport as a bit of a throwback to the good old days. And the kind of the telltale things were the kind of the fairing on the front here, which was synonymous with the R90S, and the big high capacity engine. This is a 980cc air-cooled boxer twin, and you might hear the term airhead thrown around a lot in context of these bikes, and that's because, you know, they're just kind of synonymous with being big air-cooled machines, and they've been making these for decades. Even in the 1980s, they'd been making these for decades, so there was nothing really particularly new. BMW had made a few changes on the Classic Sport over the R90, so it had Bing carburetors. I think there were Dill Autos on the R90. The airbox system had slightly changed, so it's got this kind of big black airbox here, which, yeah, personally, I think I prefer the look of what they had on the R90S, but this is the one that's in keeping with the style of this bike. I had toyed with changing that out for a slightly older style airbox, but I decided to keep it the same. The principle of what I did when I built this bike was to try to stay true to the original. Not super true, so I know if there's purists watching this, I apologise for some of the things I've done, but I did try to keep the silhouette of the bike the same. I definitely didn't want to chop it up and turn it into a cafe racer, so we put the angle grinders away and decided to keep it as it should have been in terms of the look, but there's a few subtle changes here and there that just make it a little bit more rideable. So, modern suspension. This is Hagen's stainless steel twin shock system. Absolutely love those. Kind of nitrogen charged cartridges on them. Kind of big, chunky. You know, they kind of work quite nicely with the look of the bike. The brakes. Original Brembo brakes, but I've just kind of changed the discs on the front to EBC floating discs. The originals were really badly warped when I first got the bike. They were like, you could literally feel it pulsing through the lever, bit of a nightmare. And the paint is slightly different as well, so it would have come with a metallic paint, metallic black, but I just decided to go for a solid kind of, you know, deep gloss piano black, which was done by Ace Classics, the guys at Ace Classics, which I know you guys know. So there's a few little bits and pieces under the hood as well, you know, like the top yoke here. So these bikes are notorious for being a little bit wobbly and weavy. And you can do quite a lot for these bikes by just stiffening up the top of the forks here. That's a big chunky billet aluminium top yoke there, which a lot of people, even back in the day, were putting on these bikes. Inside the suspension, we've got Hyper Pro progressive springs. And I've done quite a lot of work on the electronics as well. I mean, these bikes are so over-engineered mechanically. Like, these engines are literally like cockroaches. They will drag you around the world on one cylinder with all manner of neglect. They'll just kind of keep going. But the electronics on these bikes, like a lot of bikes, are kind of the Achilles heel, really. So I ripped out a lot of the original electronics, and we've done things like put a modern, what do we call it? Well, originally they're called the bean can, which is the Hall effects sensor that runs off the crank. No, it runs off the cam, sorry, on these bikes. So it runs off the cam, Hall effect sensor under there. It was 42 years old or whatever, so I decided to take that out, put a wedge tail system in there, took the coils off it, replaced it with modern Endurolast coils. So, you know, the original Bosch system's gone. The the ignition control unit's been changed out for a modern system. So it's all kind of digital in terms of how it's timed now and how the kind of spark fires. But that was really the bit that I just wanted to get set right. So if I'm going to take this out on longer trips, that would probably be the bit that goes wrong. So now, actually, what I think I've ended up with is a bike that I feel really confident in terms of taking out for longer rides. And I do ride this bike. I've done a couple of thousand miles since I rebuilt it. It's been on a few little tours around the Cotswolds and things like that. But I honestly would think nothing of taking this out and doing some proper long distance riding on it. The engine is absolutely bomb-proof. It's so easy to get parts for it. There's some wonderful retailers like Motorworks and Motorbins that have got pretty much everything you could ever hope for. And of course, eBay is absolutely full of this stuff because these bikes were made for decades and a lot of the parts are really interchangeable. So fantastic classic bikes to own if you're looking for something that's got that kind of old school look and feel to it, loads of character, loads of charm, but will actually start, and you'll come back to it in the garage after a week's worth of riding and it won't have dropped all its oil on the floor. It's just a reliable classic bike that will hang out with modern bikes until the cows come home. It's a fantastic thing. So I bought it for myself as a kind of 40th birthday present. And I suppose in some regards, like taking something old and decrepit and turning it into, the best thing it can be was maybe a little bit of a metaphor for those kind of feelings you go through when you turn 40, wanting to bring something back to life. And I honestly feel like it could probably do another 40 years now. I think it would be absolutely fine. They're built to last. They were built in an era where we didn't have such a throwaway society, and things were made for the long haul. And I think this has got plenty more years left in it.
Hey everyone, just a quick shout out and thank you to BMW UK for loaning us this absolutely gorgeous R18B to ride and enjoy on the channel. We've been putting the bike through its paces and I've had it since brand new. I personally ran the bike in and am now using it for shooting content, running errands and anything else we want. If you're into cruisers and BMWs like I am, hopefully you'll love what we've produced on this bike. Thanks again to BMW for making this happen.
One of the dangers of these bikes is it can be quite hard to spot bikes that are in a really terrible mechanical state. Because they're so reliable and so well engineered, a lot of them will just fire up. You can drag them out of a barn, you can give it a kick and chances are it will start and it will get you down the road. And that's kind of the great thing about these bikes. They are literally indestructible. But it can be a little bit of a gotcha as well if you're wanting a bike that's running really well, because you might think, well, by virtue of the fact it starts and goes, then maybe it's all good. The gearboxes on these bikes can be a little bit tricky. So after about 50, 60,000 miles, you tend to want to, have the gearbox apart. So it might be worth looking at whether that's been done. Some of the later bikes, so this bike's got Nickel cylinders. That's kind of notorious for wearing out. In fact, when I rebuilt this engine, the cylinders had to be re-Nickel sealed. They've got very simple valves, so you should be able to hear them rattling. They've got a kind of a nice sewing machine style to them. You don't want to hear them too loud, but at the same time, you don't want there to be like no sound at all, because that might mean that they've really tightened up and somebody hasn't spotted that. And apart from that, it's just the usual stuff. Like these front forks are notorious for kind of binding up and being a little bit sticky, so give it a bit of a bounce. Listen for any like grinding or nasty sounds in the final drive, because don't forget these are drive shaft bikes, so there's a lot of mechanics going on in the bevel drive and inside the swing arm and things like that. And if you need to take all that stuff out, that can get quite expensive and quite specialist in terms of just figuring out how you're going to rebuild all of that. These are wonderfully easy bikes to work on when it comes to the simple stuff like adjusting things and all that, but it can get quite specialist if you need to, go work on the final drive or, sort out all the gearbox and things like that. That's the kind of stuff where you're going to start racking up costs pretty quickly. So yeah, it's always a little bit of a black box when you're buying a new bike, but listening out for the sounds that shouldn't be there, checking its service record, looking at mileage and things like that. But chances are you'll probably end up picking up a bike that doesn't need that much doing to it, because as I said, they're really built to last. They're pretty solid machines.
Okay, so I guess one of the cool things about these sort of bikes is that you can do a lot of work on it yourself, and with the BMW, it's pretty easy to get into.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I mean, you can see it all here, right? So this is, if you're just doing your kind of basic maintenance, it's all just laid out in front of you. You don't have to take the tank off, you don't have to rip anything apart, there's nothing really going on under the seat. It's all kind of here and super easy to work on. So it's like one bolt there, a couple of nuts there to get the valve covers off, pull them out, and it's just a simple 2-valve setup under there. So you can literally do your valve checks on the side of the road. So easy to do, it's untrue, takes 15 minutes, if that. Working on your carbies, so these are Bing constant velocity carbs. These are the original carbs that came on the bike. And again, they're very, very simple, really. The only things to kind of get right, obviously you've got to figure out how you're going to balance them. So they've got a little vacuum port under there. So you plug in your carb balancer, your mercury sticks or whatever you want to use. So hook them up there, get them on a carb balancer, and then twiddle these until you're all set. And obviously you want to set your throttle cables and things like that, but again, it's so easy to do it. And then you've got a little mixture screw under here for setting your idle mixture, which is, takes a little bit of finessing and figuring out in terms of how you're going to set that up so that it's nice and clean on idle and takes off nicely, but they're so simple. So I'm kind of new to carburetors, right? I'm not going to lie, I'm early 40s, I had a bit of experience with carbs on cars and things like that, but they're kind of new to me, and there's obviously a bit of a learning curve in terms of figuring out how to get these particular carbs set up just right. They're a bit finicky. I have found, and if ever you get into these Bings, I have found setting the idle mixture as lean as it will possibly go before it starts to run rough on idle is the best setting. So really it's just a case of getting the screwdriver up under there, listening to what's going on in the cylinder. Like you'll hear it start to stumble, start to want to stall, and then just back it out just like a screwdriver's width until it just picks up, and then it's in a good place. A lot of people say, oh, well, you should get it to like the revs are at their highest and all that kind of stuff. I've found that getting it just to that kind of tip off where it just wants to run rough, and then just clean it up a little bit, and it runs as sweet as a nut, and you get this beautiful transition. The thing is with these being constant velocity carbs is they don't have there's not a direct kind of pull on the sliders. So you're actually just opening a butterfly, and then it's vacuum that's lifting the slider up. So there's always like a little bit of delay. They don't have a pump, so there's no they don't squirt fuel in. There's a transition circuit, so you're kind of relying on getting that idle just in the right place, so that when you do go to give it a little bit of throttle, when the butterflies open up and you're waiting for the vacuum to rise and the sliders to come up, it doesn't kind of bog down and get into trouble in that little transition point. That's the bit I found needs a little bit of finessing. But, it's just a little bit of trial and error. You go out with a screwdriver in your pocket, pull up to the side of the road when it's nicely warmed up, listen to it, hear it, feel it, get it to that point, as I said, where it's just starting to clean up on the tick over, and then you're pretty much good to go. But it took me a while to figure that out. And I did play around with jetting and things like that. So this is running a slightly richer needle jet. I made a whole video actually on doing that. Again, it doesn't take long to kind of whip the main jet off, take the needle out, and then put a little slightly bigger needle jet in there, which is what I've done. So it's just running slightly richer on the needle. But I found that very, very lean on the idle seems to be where it likes to be.
So easier stuff for people into classic bikes rather than digging in the engine is sort of like the handling, tyres, suspension.
Yeah, and these bikes can be a bit finicky when it comes to all that stuff actually. So when I first got this bike, before I rebuilt it, the handling was dreadful. In fact, the first time I got on it, I thought I was going to crash because you get up to about 40 miles an hour and it had this horrendous vibration that would come up through the front end, and if you left it to its own devices, it would probably get into a right old tank slapper. So yeah, a little bit scary. And these bikes are notorious for, well, let's just say they're not known to be the best handling machines in the world. But you can tighten them up, you can get them into a position where they do handle quite nicely. So things to look at. We kind of talked about this top yoke here, so stiffening up the forks as much as you can. Tyre choice can make a really big difference on these bikes as well. So I've gone for a modern Continental, it's called a Classic Attack tyre, quite kind of soft and sticky. I think a lot of guys use these for like classic racing and things like that. So I think they're a radial design. So kind of modern structure of that tyre, which definitely improves the handling. Obviously, changing things like your steering bearings and all that kind of stuff as part of a rebuild is going to make a difference. So we've got, a complete new set of bearings in there, and the bike rides as smooth as glass now. But it's definitely something that may be problematic if you're picking up one of these older bikes, if the front end's been neglected. I think when I took these forks apart, there was only oil in one leg. I don't know what had happened to the other leg. It was just turned to mush. All the seals had gone, and just a little bit of kind of black goop just dripped out of one side. So making sure you've got your fork kind of oil set at the perfect levels. I put new springs in these forks as well, so they're actually running Hyper Pro progressive springs, which has made a bit of a difference as well. But also weirdly, like the back end and the back tyre can make a big difference to how the steering feels as well on these bikes. So even neglecting your tyre pressure can cause all kinds of problems with the front end. So you've got to just make sure that you stay on top of that stuff. And that relationship between your rear shocks and how you've got those set up and the front end as well can make a big difference. So naturally, these bikes can have handling problems. Like they got a bit of a nickname back in the day as the rubber cow. And part of that was due to the slightly kind of weird feeling that you get through having this direct drive. If you come off the throttle really hard, they can kind of get a little bit out of shape in corners and things like that. The front end was notorious for it being a little bit twitchy and wobbly and weavy. But this is all stuff that you can dial out with a little bit of maintenance, and certainly with modern tyres and modern springs and all that kind of stuff, you can get these into a pretty good shape. And I said this bike handles not quite like a modern bike, but definitely is acceptable. The brakes are pretty good as well. Absolutely nothing wrong with these Brembo brakes here. So the twin Brembos that came on the CS are fantastic. We won't talk about the rear brake. Definitely not its strongest point. But the front brake is actually really good. I mean, obviously it doesn't have things like ABS, so you got to be a bit careful. But it will stop. As long as they're not leaking, as long as there's no obvious kind of like problems with corrosion and things like that. You put a nice fresh set of pads in it. So when I got into this bike, the kind of criteria for me was I want a classic bike that I can actually get out there and ride, take it for long distance rides and enjoy being on it. And it's absolutely ticked that box for me. This bike back in the day was known as the Gentleman's Express, and that's exactly what it feels like. I kind of liken it to being in a Bentley Continental GT. It's so civilized, it's so refined, it's so smooth, and it just loves sitting on the motorway at about 70 miles an hour, and it will just take you there. This bike was built for grumpy German men who want to whip across the continent in style, in comfort, not having to get your hands dirty and get the oily rags out. It will just take you there. And as I said, if you maintain one of these bikes properly, look after it, there is absolutely no reason why this couldn't hang out with your mates on brand new bikes, sit with them at motorway speeds all day, and take you there in comfort and style. Honestly, it's that type of bike. There's a few kind of nuances to it in terms of just like handling and the feeling of these older bikes versus modern bikes. The first thing that you might notice when you get on it, you start it up, if you're not used to the kind of the valves and the tappets and all that, it sounds like it's falling apart a little bit sometimes. That takes a little bit of getting used to. When it's cold, it's a little bit grumpy. I've tuned this bike, and you should tune these bikes to be at their optimal running when they're warmed up, which often means when they're cold, they're a little bit, you've got to kind of keep them alive a bit on the throttle, otherwise the RPM will drop off a little bit. So obviously we've just touched on some of the basic stuff, but I have got a YouTube channel, it's called Wildlife Moto, where we get kind of way more into the build. I tried to kind of film as much of the build of this bike as possible. So the kind of the reconstruction of it all happened in a dark, damp garage in Islington with no lighting, no water, no electricity, just kind of bolted it all together. But there is a whole series of videos if you want to go check out how I put this bike together. I would also say, actually, if you're thinking about getting into one of these bikes, there's a couple of really good YouTube channels you should definitely check out. So there's a guy called Brooke Reams. He is one of the gurus, an absolute legend in this space, the airhead space, and his videos are so detailed, and he's so meticulous with how he works on these bikes. There's another channel called the Boxer Twin channel, I think, which again, really good content there. And that's one of the great things about these airheads, is that they have such a community of people who absolutely love these bikes and are very giving in terms of their knowledge. There's a fantastic website called the Snowboom website. If you can get yourself through the reams of text, it's long and very detailed. Definitely check that out. And obviously there's all the forums and things like that as well, where you've got a lot of guys who really know these bikes, and as I said, they're very particular about how they're put together and how they're done. So there are ways of doing things, which are definitely worth getting your head around. One of the things that you'll notice, like getting into any classic bike, is you will have to do a lot of this stuff yourself, because sadly, a lot of the guys that were running small businesses and workshops working on these types of bikes are kind of long gone now. Like the modern dealerships and most garages won't touch them. So if you're getting stuck into any classic bike, you are going to have to roll your sleeves up and do a lot of this stuff yourself. For a lot of people, that's part of the fun and part of the joy. For others, that's really scary. But I would say if you're not really that way inclined, you should probably think twice, because you are inevitably going to have to get the screwdrivers out. But as I said, so easy to work on, a real pleasure to own. Once they're set up, they're kind of good to go. You don't have to do too much fiddling. So I'd highly recommend one.